Yep, great. So I'll launch straight into it because we're running a little bit behind on time. But yeah, I'm basically just going to very quickly cover sort of where we are now, what we're aiming for, and sort of how we're going to get there. I think the how we're going to get there is probably the most important part, but understanding where we are now and where we're trying to get to is part of that journey. So one of the major ways that we're going to be able to decarbonise is by shifting over to electricity. We've got a variety of sources that electricity can come from, and that depends on sort of how carbon intensive the thing that you're making the electricity comes from. So if you're making it from coal, you're still going to have high carbon emissions. If you're making it from something like solar or wind, they're going to be much lower. Here what I've done is tried to show what we have here in the UK at the moment. So the kind of picture of the UK on the left is what we call our transmission network. So you can kind of think of this like motorways for electricity. So these are your kind of main routes that go across all the country. And then we've also got a distribution network, which is kind of like your B roads and your country roads that actually get it from this transmission network to your house or to your business, wherever you happen to be. So we have the transmission grid, the motorways, if you will, is run in England and Wales by an organisation, conveniently enough, called the National Grid. Quite easy to remember. A little bit more complicated when you get down to distribution. It's split up into a lot of different organisations. Thankfully, the one that covers all of Preston is called Electricity North West. So they handle that for us. Yeah, so there is both a gas and an electricity grid, but normally when we talk about the grid, we're talking about the electrical grid specifically. So you normally kind of preface it with gas grid if you're talking about the gas grid. And if you live in the north of Preston, you'll have seen that Cadent were digging up everywhere recently to upgrade the gas grid. Yep, there we go. So this is the electricity breakdown for 2022. I'm not going to go into the numbers too deeply, but I'm going to talk about the different kinds of ways that we generate electricity. And I'm going to start with coal. But before I do that, it does say TWH there. That's I'm just going to cover what that means. So on your electricity bill at home, you'll have kWh, which is kilowatt hours. So that's if you were to run like a very powerful microwave, like 1,000 watts for an hour. I don't suggest any of you cook like that. And if you do, please don't invite me. But this terawatt, you go from kilo to mega to giga and then to tera. So it's 1 billion times more than that unit of electricity you use at home. Just to put that into context for how big these numbers are that we're talking about here. But yeah, coal is, I think we know about coal. It's quite dirty. It's responsible for a lot of smogs that we used to have several decades ago in this country. But for a while now, it has been less than 2% of our electrical generation, and we are phasing it down to 0 in 2025. So it's a very positive thing. Oil is slightly less carbon intense, and it is used in kind of off-gas grid homes very heavily because it's quite easy to transport, and it's too expensive to build a gas grid to some of the rural locations. But that does bring us on to gas, which, as you can see here, is the biggest chunk there. Gas is sort of the cleanest burning of the fossil fuels. It is the most flexible and the most useful in terms of running the grid. But there is also another problem with that. So as Mike kind of touched on before, it's not just carbon dioxide that gives us these carbon emissions. There's also methane, which is 84 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide. So leakage of that is a big problem. Burning it is a big problem. But it is a very, very useful one. And it kind of counters when you have times when technologies like wind and solar aren't providing as much. That flexibility is extremely useful. I'm going to talk about nuclear next. That is not a flexible form of generation. That essentially provides what we call a stable base load. So it provides like a very steady level of electricity to the grid. It's a lot safer than people think it is, despite what you might think about nuclear. and it is very low carbon, even sort of in some comparisons compared to renewables. Hydro is where you have kind of a dam full of electricity, full of water, sorry, and especially kind of if you're in the middle of Corrie or in the middle of a football match and everyone switches on their kettles halfway through. That's when they tend to run a lot of hydro to kind of provide that power very quickly. And then wind and solar are kind of the cheapest. 1 minute left. Oh my God. So yeah, wind and solar are cheapest ones, and they are, you got kind of a summer benefit with solar and a winter benefit with wind where they're most common. And yeah, they're expanding the most rapidly. There's other technologies in there from renewables like biomass, which is kind of burning of wood pellets. That happens in Drax in North Yorkshire quite a bit. But yeah, I'm going to move on to my next slide since I've only got a minute left. So yeah, this one's natural gas demand. I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. Electricity generation went really high after 1990 because that was when we started to really try and bring our carbon down. So we switched away from coal to gas. But a big chunk of this, kind of about half, is domestic and industrial, and that's going towards heat. You can do that a lot more efficiently with electricity, but it is a massive, massive change to do that. For every unit of energy that you put into a house using gas, you can achieve 3 units of heat in a home using 1 of electricity. So electricity is a much more efficient way of doing that. And yeah, I'll touch on this and I'll just leave on the last slide. But this is how we're going to get there. Replace gas with electricity, use storage technologies, so things like batteries and hydrogen. Batteries are very cheap on a very short term, but they suffer if you try and do them on longer term, whereas hydrogen's the complete opposite of that. And as I kind of just said there with heat pumps, we want to use technologies that depend on electrification and use efficient ones so that we make our problem much, much smaller. We want to make that problem as small as possible. And I'll leave you with some very, very big figures of where we're heading towards. So yeah, you can have a look at those, and yeah, my time's up, I think. So I'll stop talking there.